They left her by the water, 1815 frontier story. They didn't leave her because they hated her. They left her because they couldn't afford not to. The wagon train had already lost 3 people crossing the last ridge. 1 to fever, 1 to a fall, and her husband to a snapped axle and a crushed chest beneath it. By the time they reached the narrow valley with the stream cutting through it, the decision had already been made, just not spoken out loud. Margaret Hale knew it before anyone said it. Her wagon had been struggling for miles. The rear wheel, cracked clean through the rim, had been held together with rope and a strip of iron her husband had hammered into place 2 nights before he died. It wasn't meant to last. Nothing out here was. When the train stopped by the stream, it wasn't kindness. It was necessity. Water for the animals. A place to rest. A place to decide. Margaret. It was Thomas Reed, the trail lead. A hard man, not cruel, just worn down by too many decisions that ended with someone buried. He didn't meet her eyes at first. That told her everything. You can't travel on that wheel, he said finally. I know, she answered. Her voice didn't shake. She had buried that part of herself 2 days ago beside her husband, under a pile of stones she couldn't bring herself to look at twice. There's timber here, Thomas added. Water. Game, maybe. If you stay, you might manage. Might. That word hung heavier than anything else. Behind him, the others avoided looking at her. Not out of shame. Out of fear. Because tomorrow it could be them. Her son, Eli, stood close to her side. 10 years old. Too quiet since his father died. Are we staying? He asked. Margaret didn't answer right away. She looked at the stream. Clear water. Moving steady. Not stagnant. That mattered. Then she looked at the trees, dense, tall, close enough for wood, far enough not to choke the light completely. That mattered too. Finally she nodded. We're staying. No one argued, because the truth was simple. If she tried to go on, she'd slow them down. And if she slowed them down, more would die. They gave her what they could spare, which wasn't much. Half a sack of flour, a small pouch of dried beans, an iron pot, a hatchet with a worn handle, a coil of rope, 1 blanket, and her husband's rifle. No one said goodbye. They said things like, God watch over you. You picked a good spot. You'll be all right. Words meant to ease their own, leaving more than her staying. When the wagons finally rolled out, the sound was louder than she expected. Wood creaking, wheels grinding, voices calling, then fading, then gone. Silence took their place. Eli stood beside her. They're not coming back, are they? Margaret watched the empty trail for a long moment. No, she said. And then, because he deserved truth over comfort. That means we don't wait for them. That was the moment everything changed. The forest wasn't something around them anymore. It was something they had to live inside. The first problem came fast. Shelter. Night in the mountains wasn't forgiving, and they had hours at best. Margaret walked the wagon slowly, studying it, not as something broken, but as something to take apart. Help me pull the canvas, she told Eli. Together, they stripped the wagon down. The cover came first, thick, weathered cloth stretched over wooden ribs. Then the ribs themselves. Curved wood. Useful. Everything was useful now. They built their first shelter before the sun dropped. Not well. Not strong. But enough. A lean-to against a fallen log, angled to block the wind. Canvas stretched tight. Branches layered thick across the back. Leaves piled for insulation. It wouldn't last long. But it didn't need to. It needed to last 1 night. Fire was harder. Her husband had always done it. She knew how in theory. But theory didn't warm your hands. It took longer than she wanted. Too long. The sun dipped low, shadows stretching cold and long through the trees. Eli didn't complain. He just watched, waiting. Finally, a spark caught. Then another. Then flame. Margaret let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. We'll be all right, she said. This time it wasn't for him. It was for herself. That night, they didn't sleep much. Every sound was louder. Every crack of a branch, every rustle in the dark. The forest wasn't quiet. It was alive. And they were new to it. Eli shifted beside her under the single blanket. Ma. Yes. What if we can't do this? She looked at the fire, burning low but steady. Then at the shelter, rough but standing. Then at the stream, still moving, even in the dark. We don't get to ask that, she said softly. We just do it anyway. And somewhere in that long night, between fear and exhaustion, between loss and survival, Margaret Hale stopped being someone who had been left behind and became someone who had chosen to stay. Morning came cold, colder than Margaret expected. The kind of cold that didn't just sit on your skin, but settled into your bones and stayed there. The fire had burned down to embers sometime in the night. Margaret noticed it the moment she opened her eyes. That and the silence. No wagon wheels. No voices. No movement except the stream. They were alone. Truly alone now. Eli was still asleep, curled tight under the blanket, his back pressed against the log, as if trying to disappear into it. Margaret didn't wake him. Not yet. Instead, she stepped out from under the shelter and looked around with clearer eyes than she had the day before. Yesterday had been about surviving the moment. Today was about surviving what came next. First, fire. She knelt at the pit, gently pulling apart the ash with a stick. A faint glow. Still alive. Good, she whispered. It took less effort this time. Dry twigs. Small branches. Careful breath. Flame returned. Stronger. That was the first lesson she learned out there. Don't start over if you don't have to. Protect what's already working. When Eli woke, there was already heat. That mattered more than he knew. I thought it went out, he said quietly. So did I, Margaret answered. It didn't. She handed him the last of the cold water from the night before. Drink. Then we work. He nodded. No complaints. That worried her more than anything. Children were supposed to complain. It meant they still felt safe enough to. But Eli, he was learning too fast. Food came next. Or rather, the lack of it. They had enough for maybe 3 days if they stretched it. Flour. Beans. After that, the land decided. We don't eat full, Margaret said as she split the portion. We eat enough. Eli didn't argue. He just nodded again. That silence followed them through the morning. Margaret started with the wagon. Because the wagon wasn't useless. It was unfinished. The broken wheel made it impossible to move. But that didn't matter anymore. They weren't going anywhere. Everything here is ours now, she told Eli. Not just what's whole. What's broken, too. They pulled it apart piece by piece. Boards pried loose. Nails saved carefully. Even bent iron set aside. Nothing wasted. Nothing ignored. By midday, the wagon didn't look like a wagon anymore. It looked like a pile of possibilities. Margaret chose a spot just above the stream. Not too close, flooding could take everything. Not too far, water was life. We build here, she said. It wasn't a cabin. Not yet. It was a start. For corner posts driven into the ground. Cross beams lashed with rope. Wagon boards forming a partial wall. It leaned slightly. Crooked. Imperfect. But it stood. By late afternoon, her hands were blistered. Eli's too. Neither of them mentioned it. That was the second lesson. Pain didn't stop the work. It just became part of it. Hunger came back stronger that evening. More noticeable. More demanding. We need more than this, Eli said, holding his small portion. Margaret nodded. I know. So she tried something she hadn't planned to do so soon. The rifle. She hadn't fired it since her husband died. Hadn't wanted to. But want didn't matter. They walked into the trees together. Slow. Careful. Listening more than looking. It took time before they saw anything. A rabbit. Small. Still. Margaret raised the rifle. Her hands didn't shake. Not from fear. From something else. Memory. Her husband standing like this. Showing her. Correcting her stance. Telling her to breathe. She exhaled. Pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the trees. And the rabbit was gone. Missed. The silence afterward felt louder than the gunshot. Eli didn't say anything. But she felt it. The weight of it. We try again tomorrow, she said. That was the third lesson. Failure doesn't mean stop. It means you're not done yet. They went back empty-handed. Dinner was thinner that night. The fire burned lower. And the cold felt closer. Eli sat staring into the flames. Ma, what if winter comes before we're ready? Margaret looked at the half-built structure. The small pile of supplies. The endless trees. Then back at him. Then we get ready faster. It wasn't a good answer, but was the only one that mattered. That night, something shifted again. Eli didn't stay close to the fire. He stood, walked to the edge of their small clearing, looked out into the trees, like he was measuring them, like he was starting to understand. This wasn't temporary. This was life now. And Margaret saw it. The moment childhood stepped back, and something harder took its place. She didn't stop it. She couldn't, because the truth was, she was changing too. Not into someone stronger, into someone who had no choice but to be. The forest didn't care who they had been, only who they were willing to become. And on that second night, with hunger still sharp, with shelter still weak, with fear still present. They made a quiet, unspoken decision. They weren't leaving. They were building something here, even if it took everything they had. The third morning didn't feel as cold. Not because it wasn't, but because Margaret didn't notice it the same way anymore. She woke before the light, before the birds, before Eli. The fire was still alive. Barely, but alive. She fed it without thinking. Small sticks first, then larger ones. Careful, efficient, no hesitation this time. That was the change. The world hadn't gotten easier. She had just stopped waiting for it to be. By the time Eli woke, she was already working. "Eat," she said, handing him a smaller portion than yesterday. He noticed. Of course he did. But this time, he didn't look at the food. He looked at the trees. "I can try the traps," he said. Margaret paused. "You've never set one alone." "I watched," he replied. That was true. His father had shown him. Once. Maybe twice. It wasn't enough. But nothing out here was. Margaret studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Stay close. Set them where you can still see the clearing." He didn't argue, didn't hesitate, just took the cord they had cut from spare rope and walked into the trees. Margaret watched him go. That was the fourth lesson. You don't wait until someone is ready. You let them become ready. She turned back to the structure. It needed more than it had. The lean-to had kept them alive, but it wouldn't keep them through rain, or wind, or time. So she worked. She stacked heavier wood along one side, layer by layer, filling the gaps with mud and wet earth, pressing it in with her hands. It wasn't pretty, but it blocked the wind. The wagon boards became a door, crooked, loose, but something that could close. The roof came next, branches layered thick, then covered with canvas, then weighted down with more wood. Every piece added was a decision. Will this hold? Every answer had to be. It has to. By midday the sky shifted. Darker, heavier. Margaret noticed immediately. Clouds moved in low over the mountains. Fast. "Eli," she called. No answer. Her chest tightened, not with panic, but with something sharper. Calculation. She stepped toward the tree line, and then she saw him. Running. He wasn't empty-handed. A small rabbit hung from his grip. "I got one," he shouted, breathless. Margaret didn't smile right away. She looked at the sky, then back at him. "Good," she said. "Now hurry." The first drop of rain hit the dirt as they reached the shelter. Then another. Then more. Within minutes, the sky opened. Rain fell hard, cold, relentless. It hit the roof first. A steady pounding. Margaret watched carefully. Water pooled, then ran off one side. Not perfect, but working. The walls held. Mostly. A few thin streams slipped through the cracks. She moved quickly, packing more mud into the gaps. Eli crouched by the fire, shielding it with his body. "Don't let it die," she said. "I won't," he answered. And he didn't. That storm lasted hours. Long enough to test everything. The shelter. The fire. Them. When it finally passed, the forest looked different. Cleaner. Darker. And quieter. Margaret stepped outside. The ground was soaked. The air colder. But the structure still stood. She placed her hand against the rough wood. Still there. That mattered. Behind her, Eli worked with the rabbit. Awkward. Careful. Trying to remember what he'd seen before. Margaret watched him for a moment. Then stepped in. "Here," she said. "Like this." She guided his hands. Showed him where to cut. How to clean it. Not gently. Not harshly. Just directly. That was the fifth lesson. Some things you don't protect people from. You teach them through. That night, they ate better. Not full, but better. And for the first time since the wagons left, there was something else. Not comfort. Not safety. But progress. Eli sat closer to the fire. Not because he was afraid, but because he was thinking. "We can do this," he said quietly. Margaret didn't answer right away. She looked at the shelter, the repaired walls, the roof that held, the fire that survived. Then at him. "Yes," she said, but her voice carried something more now. Not hope, belief. And that was stronger. Outside, the forest moved as it always had. Unchanged, uncaring. But inside that small, rough structure, something had begun to take shape. Not just survival, something closer to a life. And it was being built. One hard decision at a time. By the following week, the place no longer felt temporary. Not because it was finished, but because they had stopped treating it like something they might leave. The structure stood firmer now. Walls packed tighter. Roof layered thicker. The fire pit better shaped, stones arranged to hold heat longer. Margaret noticed something she hadn't expected. She knew where things were. Without looking, the hatchet leaned near the entrance. The rope hung from a wooden peg. The pot rested just to the right of the fire. That was new. That was dangerous. Because familiarity could make you careless. And out here, careless didn't forgive. Eli was already outside when she stepped out. He was checking the traps. Not like before. Not uncertain. He moved with purpose now. And when he came back, he carried nothing. Nothing today, he said. Margaret nodded. That's how it goes. She didn't soften it. Didn't dress it up. Because this was the sixth lesson. The land doesn't reward effort. It rewards understanding. And they were still learning. Food had become a rhythm. Some days better. Some worse. But it wasn't enough yet. Not steady. Not safe. So Margaret turned to something harder. Foraging deeper into the forest. She showed Eli what she thought she knew. Berries that looked familiar. Roots that seemed safe. Leaves that didn't smell wrong. It wasn't knowledge. It was memory. And memory wasn't always right. They gathered what they could. Enough to feel like progress. Enough to make a mistake. That evening, they cooked everything together. The rabbit from the day before. The plants they had gathered. A thin stew stretched as far as it could go. It smelled better than anything they'd had in days. Eli smiled when he tasted it. That should have been the warning. Margaret ate too. At first. Nothing. Then. A slow discomfort. A tightening. Her stomach turned. Eli shifted beside her. Ma. His voice was weaker now. That's when she knew. They had gotten it wrong. Not all of it. But enough. The forest had answered their mistake. And it didn't answer gently. The night stretched long. Eli couldn't keep the food down. Neither could she. The fire burned low as she tried to keep it alive between waves of weakness. Every movement felt heavier. Every second longer. And for the first time since the wagons left, Margaret felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Not fear. Doubt. Not about the forest. About herself. I did this, she whispered. Eli shook his head weakly. We didn't know. But that didn't change anything. That was the seventh lesson. Out here, not knowing isn't an excuse. It's a risk. Morning came slowly. Too slowly. But they were still alive. Weak. But alive. Margaret didn't waste time. She dragged herself to the stream. Water first. Always water. She forced herself to drink. Then brought it back for Eli. No food. Not yet. They waited. Hours passed. The sickness eased. Not gone. But loosening its grip. Margaret sat outside the shelter, staring at the ground where they had prepared the plants. She separated what was left. Examined again. Closer this time. One of them was wrong. Subtle. Easy to miss. Deadly enough. She threw it into the fire. Watched it burn. Memorized it. That was the eighth lesson. You don't just learn what works. You learn what almost kills you. For the next 2 days, they didn't gather anything new. They relied only on what they knew. Small portions. Simple food. Careful choices. And slowly, strength returned. Eli didn't speak much during those days. But when he did, it was different. Next time, we test it first, he said. Margaret nodded. Next time, we're sure. That word mattered now. Sure. By the end of the week, the structure had changed again. More wood stacked along the sides. Gaps sealed tighter. A small rack built near the fire to dry meat when they had it. Not just surviving anymore. Preparing. Thinking ahead. That was new. That was necessary. That night, they sat outside the shelter. The air was colder again, but not as sharp. Eli looked out into the trees. We're not going back, are we? Margaret didn't answer right away. She looked at everything around them. The shelter. The fire. The stacked wood. The stream. All of it built from nothing. All of it earned. No, she said. And this time, there was no weight behind it. No loss. Only truth. The forest hadn't accepted them. It never would. But it had allowed them to stay. And that was enough. Time stopped being measured in days. It became something else. Work done. Wood stacked. Food found. Mistakes remembered. That was how they counted now. The air had changed. Not sharply. Not all at once. But enough. Mornings carried frost now. Thin. Fragile. Temporary. A warning more than a threat. Winter was coming. And this time, they were not waiting for it to arrive unprepared. Margaret moved differently now. Not faster. Smarter. She no longer reacted to the day. She worked ahead of it. Wood came first. Always wood. They built the pile slowly. At first, it looked like enough. Then Margaret doubled it. Then added more. Why so much? Eli asked once. She didn't stop stacking. Because running out isn't something we get to try. He didn't ask again. Food came next. Not just finding it. Keeping it. That was the difference now. The first time they managed to keep extra. It felt wrong. Like they were taking more than they should. Margaret noticed it in Eli. We don't waste, she told him. We prepare. They dried what they could. Small strips of meat. Hung near the fire. Turned carefully. Watched constantly. Not much. But enough to matter. That was the 9th lesson. Survival today isn't enough. You survive tomorrow before it comes. The traps improved. Eli adjusted them himself now. Moved them farther out. Closer to where the animals actually traveled. And one morning, he came back with 2. He didn't shout this time. He just walked up and held them out. Margaret looked at him. Really looked. Not at the boy he had been. At who he was becoming. You set them right, she said. He nodded. That was enough. The shelter changed again. Stronger. More wood added. Gaps sealed tight. A second layer built along the inside wall. The door adjusted to close better. Not perfect, but better. Each improvement small. But together, they turned something temporary into something that could last. And then, one night, the cold came harder. Not frost. Snow. Light at first. Drifting. Quiet. Eli stood in the doorway, watching it fall. Is this it? He asked. Margaret stepped beside him. Not answering right away. Because this mattered. Yes, she said finally. The beginning of it. They stood there a moment longer. Not afraid. Not uncertain. Just aware of what was coming. And what they had done to meet it. That night, the fire burned strong. The walls held. The roof didn't leak. And for the first time, the cold stayed outside. Eli sat close, but not because he had to. Because he chose to. We're ready, he said. Margaret looked at the fire. Then at the wood stacked beside it. Then at the dried food hanging nearby. Then at him. Yes, she said. And this time, it wasn't hope. It wasn't belief. It was truth. They were ready. Not for everything, but for enough. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the ground, the tracks, the past, and somewhere far beyond the mountains, the wagon train kept moving, never knowing what had become of the woman they left behind, never seeing what had been built from that moment, because what they had left wasn't something broken. It was something that had simply not found its place yet. And here, by the water, among the trees, under the weight of work and time, Margaret Hale and her son didn't just survive. They made a life. One that wasn't given. One that was built. And that made all the difference.